The rain on Outpost Heron 7 was not like the rain back on Earth. It did not fall softly. It came down hard and sideways, driven by winds that smelled of rust and cold metal. The outpost sat on a gray rock at the edge of explored space, far from anything important, which was exactly why Del Rowe liked it. Nobody bothered you this far out. Nobody asked questions. You did your work, you fixed what was broken, and you slept. That was enough for him. Del was in the middle of repairing a pressure valve in the lower corridor when the alarm hit. Not the soft, polite alarm for routine things. The hard one. The one that turned the corridor lights red and made the walls shake a little. He dropped his wrench, picked up his field kit out of habit, and walked toward the main door. He did not run. He had stopped running toward alarms a long time ago. Running made you think less. Outside, through the heavy rain, something was burning. It had come down at an angle, cutting a long black scar across the landing field before stopping near the outer fence. Whatever it was not a human vessel. The shape was wrong. Too organic. Too large. The metal, what little of it was visible through the smoke, was dark and scaled looking, like something grown rather than built. Commander Rida was already outside with 4 station crew members, all of them standing at a safe distance, none of them moving forward. Rida was a solid woman with short gray hair and the kind of face that gave nothing away. Right now, however, her face was giving away quite a lot. She looked concerned, and she looked nervous, and that was not a combination Del had seen on her before. "Varek escape pod," she said when Del reached her. "At least I think it is. I have never seen one this close." Del looked at the wreck. He had not seen a Varek vessel up close either. But he had read enough. The Varek were the oldest space-faring species in the Galactic Council. They were massive, fire-breathing, and proud in a way that went beyond attitude. For them, pride was a biological fact. They did not ask for help. They did not accept charity. If a Varek warrior was wounded, they died alone before they let another species touch them. "We should wait," Rida said. "Protocol says contact the council, wait for Varek emergency response, do not approach." Del was already walking forward. "Row," Rida called after him. He did not stop. Up close, the pod was in bad shape. A long section of the hull had peeled back on one side, and through the gap Del could see the interior glow of something still powered but struggling. He crouched down and looked inside. She was enormous. Even curled up in the wreckage, even with one wing folded at a horrible angle and her dark green scales scorched black along her left side, she was enormous. Her head alone was the size of Del's entire torso. She was breathing, but each breath was wet and uneven, the kind of breathing that meant something was wrong inside. Her eyes were closed. Around her neck and chest she wore what looked like harness straps, the kind used for carrying something. And beneath her, curled under the protective arch of her damaged wing, was the smallest dragon Del had ever seen. The infant was the size of a large dog. Its scales were still soft-looking, not yet hardened into the armor the adults wore. It was a dark, dusty green, almost gray. Its eyes were open. It was not crying. It was not making any sound at all. It was just watching Del with 2 flat amber eyes that held nothing in them. No fear, no curiosity, nothing. Del looked at the baby, then at the mother, then at the baby again. He opened his field kit. He could hear Rida behind him now, closer than before, and 2 of the crew. He heard someone say something about protocol, and someone else say something about liability, and a third voice that sounded genuinely frightened. He ignored all of it. He had a patient in front of him. That was what he had. In front of him. A patient. That was all. The radiation burns on the mother's side were deep. Not survivable without treatment, and not survivable for long even with it. Her left wing was fractured in at least 2 places. Del worked carefully, moving slowly so he did not startle her, though she had not moved. He applied burn suppressant from his kit, pressing it gently into the worst of the damage. With clean cloth, he improvised a brace for the wing from 2 lengths of metal tubing he carried and a strap from his own bag. It was not a good brace. It was a field brace, which meant it was good enough to matter and bad enough to remind you that you were doing this in the rain on a rock at the edge of nowhere. He was on his third round of checking her vitals when she woke up. It was not dramatic. Her eyes opened slowly, like something surfacing from very deep water. They were gold, like her child's, but older, much older. There was pain in them, and below the pain there was something harder and colder, the look of a creature that had never once been helpless in its life and was only now learning what that felt like. She looked at Del. He held very still. For a long moment she said nothing and did nothing. Then she moved one enormous clawed hand, slowly, with great effort, and she pushed the infant toward Del. A single deliberate push toward him across the floor of the broken pod. Then her eyes closed again and her breathing went shallow. And she was gone, back under, back into wherever wounded things go when they have nothing left to spend. Del looked down at the infant. The infant looked back at him. Flat eyes. Total silence. Del exhaled slowly through his nose. He reached into his kit and pulled out an emergency thermal blanket, the foil kind, thin and crinkly. He unfolded it and draped it around the small creature as carefully as he could, trying not to think about how strange the scales felt under his hands, how warm the little body was, how none of this was in any procedure manual he had ever read. Well, he said quietly. All right then. He picked the infant up. It did not resist. It did not react at all. It simply allowed itself to be carried, wrapped in silver foil, by a human who smelled like machine oil and burn treatment and rain. Rita was standing right behind him when he turned around. She looked at the baby dragon in Del's arms. She looked at Del. She opened her mouth. I need the medical bay prepped, Del said. And I need someone to help me. Get the mother onto a transport sled. She is too heavy for one person, and we are not leaving her in the rain. Rita closed her mouth. She turned to the crew. You heard him, she said. They moved. Del carried the infant inside, out of the rain and the red alarm lights, into the warm corridor of the outpost. The little creature's amber eyes were still open, still watching him, still completely silent. Del did not know what he was doing. He was not a dragon expert. He was not a Varric specialist. He was not even a good conversationalist on a normal day. He was a medic. He was a man who fixed things. There was something broken here. That was all he knew. There was something broken, and he was right there, and so he would try. 7 days passed, and the baby dragon did not make a single sound. Not one. Not when Del changed the thermal lining in its resting enclosure. Not when the station's old ventilation system made that horrible grinding noise at odd hours of the night. Not even when one of the junior crew members, a young man named Bren, accidentally knocked over a metal tray right next to the enclosure, and the crash echoed off every wall in the medical bay. Bren had jumped back 3 feet and put his hand over his heart. The baby dragon had simply turned its head and looked at the tray on the floor. Then it looked at Bren. Then it looked back at the tray. Then it went back to staring at nothing. Bren had not come back to the medical bay after that. Del could not really blame him. The mother, whose name Del did not yet know, was stable. Barely. He had moved her to the largest room the outpost had, the cargo receiving area, and cleared it out to give her space. She was in a medically induced sleep, the kind that gave the body time to focus on nothing but repair. The burns were responding slowly to treatment. The wing was held in the brace he had built, and a proper medical team from the nearest human station was 6 days out. Del had told Commander Rita they were not waiting for the Varric Council's emergency response, because by the time Varric emergency response arrived from their nearest territory, the mother would be dead. Rita had not argued. So Del had one enormous, unconscious dragon in the cargo bay and one small, silent one in the medical bay, and absolutely no instruction on what to do with either of them. He had searched every database on the station for information about Varric infants. What he found was almost nothing. The Varric shared very little with the wider galactic community about their culture, and almost nothing at all about how they raised their young. What Del found were fragments. A few lines in a xenobiology text that noted Varric infants were carried close to the body for the first cycle of their life, which seemed to mean roughly a year. A single paper by a researcher who had observed Varric from a great distance and described their young as silent by necessity and watchful. in a way that suggests higher awareness than expected for the age. That was it. That was all he had. He tried warmth first. He adjusted the medical bay temperature up several degrees until he himself was uncomfortable and the equipment started making small complaints. The baby dragon showed no reaction. He tried sound. He played low-frequency tones from the medical speaker system, the kind used for relaxation therapy in human patients. The baby dragon watched the speaker for a while. Then it went back to staring at the wall. He tried food. He did not know what Varric infants ate, so he offered small pieces of the highest protein things available in the station kitchen. Cooked meat, a pressed grain bar, a kind of dense nutritional paste that the station crew kept for emergencies. The baby dragon sniffed each offering without expression and turned away from all of them. Del eventually found that it would eat a specific type of raw protein from the food stores, a dense compressed block meant for long-haul crew rations, but it ate only a small amount, and only when Del was not watching directly. That was the thing Del noticed slowly over the course of those first days. The baby dragon did everything only when Del was not watching directly. It ate when Del turned away. It shifted position when Del was looking at his charts. When Del fell asleep in the chair he had moved next to the enclosure, he would wake up to find the small creature 2 or 3 body lengths closer than it had been the night before, though by morning it was always back in the same corner of the enclosure, in exactly the same position, as if it had not moved at all. Del started talking. Not because he thought it helped. Not because he expected any response. He talked because the silence bothered him, and talking filled it, and he had spent enough time in field stations and remote postings to know that silence, left alone for too long, started to feel like a presence of its own. He talked about the pressure valve he had been fixing when the alarm went off, and how it still was not fixed, and how the station's entire water recycling system was held together with workarounds and old parts and sheer stubbornness. He talked about the stars outside the viewport at the far end of the bay, how the cluster to the left was called the Veil Cluster by the human survey teams, even though it had a proper galactic designation that nobody used. He talked about his old posting on a military frigate years ago, about how medics were always the ones nobody noticed until something went wrong, about how that suited him fine. The baby dragon listened to all of it. At least, it faced in his direction. When he talked, whether it understood any of it, Del had no idea. On the 5th night, Del fell asleep mid-sentence, something he had been doing more and more as the shifts ran together. He woke up in the gray early hours to find that the baby dragon had moved to the very edge of the enclosure, as close as it could get to the chair Del was sitting in, and had curled itself into a tight ball there. It was not outside the enclosure. It had not escaped. It had just moved to be as close as the boundary allowed. Del sat very still and looked at it for a long time. It was looking back at him with those flat amber eyes. In the low light, they glowed slightly, like 2 small embers left over from a larger fire. It was not broken, Del thought. He had been treating it like it was broken, like the silence was damage, like the stillness was a wound. But sitting there in the gray light, looking at the small creature curled at the edge of its space, as close to him as it could get without crossing any line, Del understood something different. It was not broken. It was waiting. It had come from somewhere terrible and seen something awful and lost whatever sense of safety it had once had. It was waiting to see if this place and this person were worth the risk of existing fully again. Del reached over and turned the desk lamp down to its lowest setting, just warm enough to keep the amber glow in the little eyes visible. "Okay," he said quietly. "Take your time." He did not know if it understood him, but it did not move away. And in the morning, when Del woke up again properly, it was still there at the edge of the enclosure, in the same spot, watching the door he had walked in through, as if it had decided that whatever came through that door was worth keeping track of. The mother had opened her eyes twice that week, briefly, and both times she had said nothing and closed them again. Del did not push. He had learned, in a long career of treating the wounded, that the first thing a person needed when they woke up in pain and confusion was not questions. It was just someone still being there. He kept being there. For both of them. because that was the only tool he had, and he had learned a long time ago that sometimes it was enough. Nobody decided it would happen. It just did, the way most things change, when nobody is watching closely enough to stop them. 3 weeks after the crash, Dell noticed that there was a second chair in the medical bay, not because he had asked for one, not because anyone had told him to put one there. He had simply moved it from the corner to next to his workstation one evening without thinking, because there was a small body that had taken to sitting near his feet while he worked, and he had thought, at some point he could not quite locate, that it might be better if that small body was a little higher up and a little warmer. So, the chair was there, and Kale, that was the name Dell had found, written on the inside of the harness the mother had been wearing in Varric script, which a translation program had rendered haltingly as something between flame beginning and simply first light. Kale had climbed into it on the second day after it appeared and had not questioned why it was there. Dell had not noticed how much he was adjusting until Sarah pointed it out. The mother was awake and mobile now, or as mobile as someone with a healing wing and a list of injuries as long as the station's maintenance log could be. She moved carefully, deliberately, like she was spending energy she did not fully have yet. She did not complain. She did not ask Dell how she was doing, and she did not thank him for anything. What she did was watch. She stood in doorways and watched Kale, and she watched Dell, and her gold eyes moved between the two of them in a way that was hard to read but not hard to feel. One afternoon, she found Dell at his workstation with Kale in the second chair beside him, both of them in their usual arrangement, Dell talking through a maintenance report to no one in particular, and Kale watching his hands move over the keypad with that quiet, total attention he gave to everything Dell did. Sarah stood in the doorway and looked at this for a while. Then she said, in standard that was slow and deliberate but perfectly clear, "What have you done to my child?" It was not a question. It was the shape of one, but the weight of something else entirely. Dell looked up. He looked at Kale, who had looked at Sarah briefly when she spoke, and then looked back at Dell's hands. Then Dell looked at Sarah. "Nothing," he said. "He follows you," Sarah said. "Yes." "He does not follow me." Dell did not have a good answer to that, so he did not try to give one. After a moment he said, he was scared. He had been through something bad. I stayed near him, and I did not expect anything from him. That is all. Sarah's eyes were flat and unreadable. Why would you do that? Dell thought about it honestly. He was here, and he needed it, and I was the only one around. That is pretty much all there was to it. Sarah looked at Kale again. Kale had gone back to watching Dell's hands. He had not looked at his mother again. Something crossed Sarah's face. It went past fast, and it was replaced immediately by the hard, measured calm she wore like armor. But Dell caught it. He had spent a career reading faces in bad moments, and what he had seen on hers for that half second was not anger and not pride. It was grief, quiet and heavy and very old, the kind that does not ask for comfort because it has stopped believing comfort is available. She turned and walked back down the corridor without another word. Dell watched her go. Then he looked at Kale. Kale was looking at the doorway where Sarah had been. Then he looked at Dell. Dell nodded slowly, the way he did when he had nothing useful to say out loud. He turned back to his work. The political trouble arrived the next day, in the form of a ship that had not sent an approach signal until it was already inside the outpost's perimeter. Commander Rida came to find Dell wearing an expression he had not seen before on her, something between professional control and the look of someone who has just found something very large and very cold blocking their path. The Varric who came off that ship made Sarah look small. He gave his name as Dresh, clan warden. He wore armor that looked like it had been built as part of him rather than put on, and he moved through the outpost corridors with the specific energy of someone who had never once, in their entire life, considered the possibility that any space they entered might not welcome them. He informed Commander Rida, calmly and without any particular anger, that Sarah and the infant were to be returned to Varric territory within 48 hours. A Varric child left in the care of a lesser species was a matter of clan honor. This was not a negotiation. Rida had come to tell Dell immediately because she knew what he was going to say, and she wanted to say it with him rather than have him say it alone. Del listened to all of it. Then he went to his desk, pulled out a medical file, and began writing a formal travel clearance denial. Sarah's injuries. Documented, listed, categorized. Travel risk assessment, extreme. His professional recommendation, no transport for a minimum of 3 weeks. He stamped it with his medical officer credentials and handed it to Commander Rita. Give that to the warden, he said. Rita looked at the document. He is a clan warden, Del. He does not recognize our medical authority. He does not have to recognize it, Del said. He just has to decide whether he wants the Galactic Council to know he forcibly transported a critical patient against the documented recommendation of her treating physician. That tends to generate paperwork for everyone. Rita stared at him for a moment. Then she took the document. Dresch, it turned out, did not want the paperwork. He gave them 72 hours. It was not a compromise. It was a threat with a timer attached. But it was time, and Del had learned long ago that time was never nothing. That night, Del sat at his workstation late, going over Sarah's charts. By the light of a single lamp, Kale was in the second chair. The outpost was quiet. Outside the viewport, the stars were out in full. Del felt something bump his arm. He looked down. Kale was holding something up toward him in one small clawed hand. It was the metal stylus that Del kept on his desk, the one he had carried for nearly 20 years, dented and worn smooth where his fingers always gripped it. He had not even noticed Kale pick it up. The small dragon was holding it out, not offering it exactly, just holding it toward him, with the same expression he used for everything, which was no expression at all. But his amber eyes were on Del's face, watching carefully, as if waiting to see what this human did when something was given back to him. Del understood. He had seen Kale watch him pick up that stylus 100 times. He was not giving Del a gift. He was giving him back his own motion. He was saying, in the only language available to him, I have been watching you. I have seen what you do. I am learning what you are. Del took the stylus slowly. He held it the way he always held it, 2 fingers and a thumb, the way he always did. He said, thank you. Kale looked at him. Then he looked away, out the viewport at the stars. But he did not leave the chair. He stayed exactly where he was, close enough that Del could feel the warmth coming off those small scales, quiet and present, and, for the first time, almost at ease. Del turned back to his charts. Neither of them said anything else. The station hummed. The stars held still, and the 72 hours began. The 72 hours ended on a morning when the outpost's heating system was being stubborn, which meant the corridors were colder than usual and everyone was in a slightly worse mood than they needed to be. Del had been awake since before the shift change, not because of the cold, because he had done the math on Sarah's recovery timeline, and he knew it, and Dresch knew it too, and a man like Dresch did not give extra time because he was generous. He gave it because he had calculated the cost of not giving it, decided that cost was acceptable to wait out, and arrived now knowing exactly what he intended to do. Del was in the medical bay when they came. Dresch entered first, which filled the corridor behind him completely because of how large he was. 2 Varek guards followed. They were in full clan armor, dark and ridged, the kind of armor that was not worn to protect but to communicate. It said, we are the ones who arrive and take things. Sarah was behind them, walking under her own power, which had cost her something. Del could see it in the way she held herself, too straight, too careful, the way people carry themselves when they are refusing to let pain show. Commander Rita was there too, standing to the side, watching with her arms behind her back and the carefully blank face of someone trying very hard not to be part of what was about to happen, but knowing they were. Dresch looked around the medical bay. His golden eyes moved across the equipment, the charts on the wall, the workstation, the 2 chairs next to it. Then they found Kale, sitting in the second chair, watching all of them arrive with those flat amber eyes. Dresch looked at Kale for a moment. Then he looked at Del. We are taking them now, he said. His standard was perfect and cold. You have had your time. Del nodded once. He did not move from where he was standing, which was between Dresch and Kale's chair. One of the guards stepped forward and reached toward Kale. What happened next took less than 2 seconds and changed everything. Kale dropped off the chair, not away from the guard, toward Del. He moved to Del's side and pressed himself against Del's leg, and then he made a sound. It was the first sound he had made since the night of the crash. It was low and it was sharp, and it came from somewhere deep in the small chest, a sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a word but was absolutely a warning, direct and clear, addressed specifically to the guard, whose hand was still extended. Everyone in the room went still. Del looked down at Kale. Kale was not looking at him. Kale was looking at the guard, ears flat, body low, every line of him saying, "Do not." Del looked at Dresh. Dresh was looking at Kale, and for the first time since he had walked into the outpost, something in his face had shifted. He was not angry yet. He was processing. He made a bonding warning. One of the guards said quietly in Varek, then seemed to remember that the station had translation systems, and stopped talking. Dresh's eyes moved from Kale to Del. "What did you do?" he said. It had the same shape as Sarah's question weeks ago, but it was colder in it. Carried an accusation underneath it, the suggestion that Del had done something deliberate and underhanded. Del looked at him steadily. "I fed him. I talked to him. I did not leave." Dresh was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are a human. You are not a guardian species. You have no clan. You have no standing in Varek. Tradition, whatever you think has occurred here." "I am not claiming anything," Del said. "He is. I do not know your laws. I know what that sound means because I washed your face when you heard it. And you do too." That landed. Del saw it. Dresh's jaw tightened slightly, and he looked at Kale again, and the look was not simple anymore. There was something complicated in it, something that was working through a problem it had not arrived prepared to solve. Sarah spoke. She had been standing behind the guards this entire time, and she spoke now. In Varek first, a single sentence, then repeated it in standard, slowly. "He kept me alive. I gave my child to him before I lost consciousness. I gave my child to him deliberately, of my own decision, knowing what I was doing." She paused. "He fulfilled the obligation, without being asked twice." The room was very quiet. Dresh turned to look at Sarah. It was a long look. Whatever passed between them in it, Del could not read. He was not Varek, but he could read the outcome, which was that Dresh turned back to the room and said nothing further about taking Kale, and stood in the silence for a moment that felt much longer than it was. "The council will hear of this," Dresh said finally, to the room, to no one in particular. Then he turned and left. The guards followed. The sound of armored feet in the corridor faded, and then the outer door opened and closed, and there was only the quiet hum of the station. Del let out a long, slow breath. He looked down at Kale. Kale was still pressed against his leg. He was not growling anymore. He was just standing there, very close, looking up at Del with those amber eyes, and the expression on his face was the same expression it always was, which was almost nothing, but underneath the almost there was something that Del was beginning to learn to read. Del reached down, slowly, and rested his hand on the top of Kale's head. Not pressing, not holding, just present. Kale did not move away. They stood like that for a moment, the human medic and the baby dragon, in the quiet medical bay with the cold corridors around them and the stars outside the viewport doing what stars always did, which was hold still and say nothing and let things happen under them. Sarah watched from the doorway. She said nothing, but she did not leave. Del straightened up after a moment. He went back to his workstation. He sat down. Kale climbed back into the second chair. Del pulled up the medical charts and began his morning review of Sarah's vitals. Commander Rida appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. She looked at the two of them at the workstation. She looked at Sarah. Then she looked at Del. "The council is going to contact us," she said. "Probably," Del agreed. "This is going to become a diplomatic matter. Also probably." Rida looked at him for a moment. "You do not seem concerned." Del found the place in Sarah's charts where the wing recovery index had ticked upward by a small but real amount overnight. "I will worry about the diplomacy when the diplomacy gets here," he said. "Right now I have a patient improving on schedule and a pressure valve in the lower corridor. that is still not fixed and a heating system that is making everyone miserable. I am going to handle things in that order. Rita almost smiled. It was a very small almost. She nodded once, turned, and left. The heating system came back online 11 minutes later. The corridors warmed up. Somewhere deep in the outpost, someone let out a small relieved sound. And in the medical bay, in the second chair, Kale tucked his chin down onto his front feet and watched Dell work, and was still, and was close, and was quiet in a way that was not empty anymore. It was beginning, very slowly, to be the other kind of quiet. The kind that does not need to be filled. 2 days after Dresch left, the lamp above Dell's workstation started dying. It did not go out all at once. It flickered. It made a faint buzzing sound. That came and went. It would be fine for an hour, and then dim for 20 minutes, fine again, then dim. Dell had put in a request to have it replaced. 3 days ago, the request was still sitting in the station's maintenance queue behind 17 other requests, which was where maintenance requests went to feel less alone. He decided to fix it himself. This required a small step stool because the lamp bracket was mounted high on the wall, and Dell was not a particularly tall man. He dragged the stool over from the supply corner, climbed up, and began working on the bracket with a flat tool that was technically not the right tool for this job, but was the tool he had. The bracket was corroded at one end and had been tightened at some point in the past by someone with much more enthusiasm than sense. It was not cooperating. Dell worked at it, muttering under his breath, shifting his weight on the stool. Kale was in the second chair watching him the way Kale watched everything he did, which was with total, unblinking attention, like someone studying for an exam that would never actually be given. Dell got the bracket loose on one side. He shifted to reach the other end. The stool rocked. He grabbed the shelf above him with one hand. His other arm knocked against the edge of his workstation desk, and his mug, which he had set too close to the edge that morning and had meant to move all day, and had kept forgetting to move, tipped off the desk and hit the metal floor with a sound like a small explosion. The mug shattered into 4 large pieces and a collection of smaller ones. Dell stared at them from the stool. Then he looked at what was left in the mug, which had been the last of the good brew he kept for late evenings, now spreading across the floor in a dark puddle between the fragments. He let out a breath. Not a sharp breath. Not a curse. Just a slow, tired, completely defeated exhale, the specific sound of a person who is not surprised, who perhaps has never been surprised by anything going mildly wrong, but who has reached the point in their day where one more small wrong thing is exactly one more than they had available room for. He climbed down off the stool. He stood next to the mess on the floor. He looked at it for a moment in silence. Then he looked up, because Kale was looking at him. Kale had turned in the chair. He was looking directly at Dell, and at the mug on the floor, and at Dell again. His small body was very still. His ears had tilted forward slightly, which Dell had started to notice was a thing that happened when Kale was paying a particular kind of attention. And then Kale's face moved. Dell saw it happen. He was looking right at it. He had spent weeks looking at that face and seeing nothing, no shift, no register, just the flat amber eyes and the still scales and the expression that was not any expression at all. He knew that face. He had memorized that face the way you memorize a landscape you see every day, knowing every detail, knowing exactly what was normal. What happened now was not normal. The corners of Kale's mouth pulled back, slowly, carefully, as if the muscles involved had not done this before and were finding their way. His eyes changed shape, just slightly, the skin around them crinkling a little. At the outer edges, his ears came forward all the way, tilted up, and his whole small face opened somehow, like something that had been held very tightly was now being, just a little, released. He was smiling. He was smiling at Dell, and at the broken mug, and at the whole ridiculous thing, the stool and the bracket and the defeated exhale and the mug that had picked exactly the wrong moment to end its life on the floor. Dell stood there and looked at him and did not move for what was probably too long to be a normal amount of time. He was not even sure what he felt. In that moment, it was too big and too quiet at the same time to have a simple name. He had spent a month with this small creature. He had talked to it every day. He had stayed near it and asked nothing of it and waited. He had told himself, on the bad nights when the political situation seemed impossible and the council message light was blinking red and the whole thing felt like it was going to collapse into something that left everyone worse off, that he was not waiting for anything, that he was just doing what needed to be done, that he did not need the creature to get better in any visible way, that being there was the work and the work was enough. He had believed that. He still believed it. But the smile hit him somewhere he had not thought to protect. He started laughing. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a low, tired, genuine laugh, the kind that comes out when something absurd and something beautiful arrive at the same moment, and you do not have the energy to separate them. He laughed at the mug and the lamp bracket and the stool, and the fact that after all the political standoffs and the clan wardens, and the medical documentation and the 72-hour deadlines, what had finally done, it was a broken coffee mug on a cold metal floor. Cale watched him laugh. The smile stayed on his face and held there, and something in his amber eyes caught the light in a way they had not before, like a window that had been dark for a long time and now had something small and warm going on behind it. Del did not know that Sarah was in the doorway. She had come to ask Del something about her recovery plan, something about whether the wing brace needed adjustment, something practical and medically relevant. She had stopped in the doorway when she heard the sound from the medical bay, or more precisely when she realized there were two sounds, and one of them was the human laughing, and the other one she needed a moment to identify because she had not heard it before. She stood very still and looked at her son's face. Cale was smiling, fully, openly, with the careless ease of someone who had simply decided, in this moment, that this was what faces were for. Sarah looked at that smile for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked back down the corridor, and she did not let Del see her face, because what was on her face in that moment was not something she was willing to show to anyone. It was too much, and it was private, and it had been waiting inside her since the night of the attack, when she had last looked at her son's face and seen it blank and still and frightened, in a way that told her something in him had gone somewhere she could not follow and might not be able to reach. She walked to the cargo bay and sat down next to the viewport and looked at the stars for a long time. That evening, she found Del alone in the corridor. She stood in front of him. He waited. "You will be recorded in my clan's memory," she said, "as Cale's first guardian." Del looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that if you are ever dying anywhere in this galaxy, and a Varek is within range of your signal, they will come." She paused. "Even if it is inconvenient." Del thought about this. "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." Sarah looked at him for a moment. Something moved briefly in her expression. Again, there and gone. "Do not make it strange," she said. She turned and walked away. Del looked at the empty corridor where she had been. Then he went back to the medical bay, picked up the pieces of the broken mug, put them in the disposal, and got another one from the cabinet. Cale was still in the second chair. He watched Del get the new mug. His ears were tilted forward. His eyes were bright. Del sat down at the workstation. "Do not get used to the entertainment," he said. "That was a one-time event." Cale blinked at him slowly. Del turned to his charts. Outside the viewport, the stars held their usual positions, indifferent and ancient and very far away, and in the warm light of the medical bay, something that had been broken for a long time was not. The message from the Varek clan council arrived on a Tuesday, which was not a meaningful detail except that Del had been having a particularly ordinary Tuesday, the kind with no crises and a full schedule of routine checks, and one slow afternoon where he had finally fixed the lamp bracket above his workstation. He had been feeling, for the first time in weeks, something like normal. Then the message light came on. The council had convened. Del's name was in the header. That was the first time in his life that had happened, and it was not a comfortable feeling. The hearing, if you could call it that, was conducted by holographic relay, which meant that a flat blue light filled the cargo bay for 2 hours while Varek council elders who were very large and very old and very certain of their own importance asked questions that were really just different shapes of the same accusation. Dresh was there too. and he laid the case out the same way he had walked into the outpost, like someone who was not arguing, so much as informing the room of a decision already made. A Varric child had bonded with a human. This was irregular. This reflected poorly on the clan's image. The bond needed to be dissolved. Kale needed to be returned to proper Varric society immediately. Then they called Sara to speak. She stood in the blue light of the relay, and she was still not fully healed. One wing held carefully, her left side still marked faintly by the burns. But she stood the way she always stood when she was in front of other Varric, which was like something that had been built rather than born, solid and deliberate, and giving nothing away that it did not choose to give. She told them what Del had done, not with admiration, not with gratitude, just with precision, the way you describe something you witnessed so that the people you are describing it to understand exactly what happened and have no grounds to reshape it. She said a human medic had come to the crash site alone and had begun treating her injuries without waiting for permission, authorization, or any assurance that he would survive doing so. She said she had placed her child in his care in the last seconds of her consciousness, and he had accepted without hesitation. She said he had kept the infant fed and warm and present for weeks without any guidance, any payment, any instruction, and any guarantee that she would live to acknowledge what he had done. She said her son had been silent since the attack, and the human had stayed beside him anyway, every day, without requiring anything in return, until her son had decided that the world was safe enough to come back to. One of the elders, an old Varric with scales that had gone almost white with age, leaned forward in the relay. Why, the elder said, would a human do this? Sara was quiet for a moment. The cargo bay was quiet. Del, sitting to the side, was very still. I asked him that, Sara said. The elder waited. He said, Sara continued, and her voice did not change, it stayed level and measured, because he was right there. The hearing was quiet for a long time after that. Dresh argued. He argued well, and with the full weight of clan authority behind him, and under other circumstances he would probably have won. But the white-scaled elder raised one hand, and Dresh went quiet, and the elder said something in Old Varric that the station's translation system rendered only partially, something about the first guardian law, something about the antiquity of bonding rights, something about the fact that law written in the founding period of the clan had not been written with exceptions for species that the Varric had not yet met. The bond could not be dissolved, not without Del's agreement, not without Kale's agreement, not without Sara's agreement. All three would have to consent, and the elder made clear that attempting to force any part of it would generate the kind of council attention that no clan warden with any sense of self-preservation would welcome. Dresh said nothing more. They contacted Del directly after the hearing. A young aide, Varric, but Junior, visibly nervous about speaking to a human, explained the first guardian designation, what it meant historically, what it meant legally, what it meant in terms of Del's standing in Varric clan matters regarding Kale for the rest of his life. The aide seemed to expect Del to be overwhelmed, or perhaps to try to leverage it into something, or to ask immediately what it was worth. Del listened to all of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I just want to make sure Kale is okay. Whatever arrangement does that, I will sign it. The aide stared at him. That is what you want, the aide said. Just that the child is well. Yes, Del said. There was a pause. I will relay that, the aide said in a tone that suggested he was going to relay it, but did not fully know what his superiors were going to do with it. What they did with it was accept it. The paperwork was filed. The first guardian record was added to Kale's clan entry. Del received a copy, which he read once, and then put in the same drawer as his old military discharge papers and the letter he had received when he first qualified as a field medic, the drawer that was not for current things but for things that mattered in a way that did not need to be visible every day. Sara and Kale left 12 days later when the medical team from the nearest station certified that Sara was fit to travel. It was not a ceremonial departure. There was no gathering, no speeches. Del walked them to the landing pad. Commander Rida came along, and two of the crew who had become less afraid of Kale over the weeks, and that was all. Sarah stopped at the bottom of the ship ramp. She looked at Del. You will be contacted, she said. When he is older, he will want to. All right, Del said. That was the whole goodbye between them. That was the right amount of it. Kale stopped at the top of the ramp. He stood there for a moment, looking back at the landing pad, at the outpost. Behind it, at Del standing near the edge of the pad with his hands in his jacket pockets. Then he walked back down the ramp. He crossed the landing pad. He put something down on the ground at Del's feet with both hands. Careful and deliberate, the way he did everything. Then he turned and walked back up the ramp and did not look back again. Del looked down at what was on the ground. The stylus, the worn metal one, dented, smooth where his fingers always held it. The one Kale had picked up off the desk weeks ago and handed back to him. The one Kale had studied and copied and understood in the way that small creatures understand the things they decide to keep. Del stood on the landing pad for a while after the ship lifted off. He stood there while the engine's sound faded and the stars came back from behind. The exhaust light and the outpost hummed around him with its ordinary sounds. Then he picked up the stylus and put it in his pocket and went back to work. There was still the water recycler to deal with. There was a new intake form that Commander Rida wanted reviewed. There was a crew member with a sprained wrist who had been putting off coming to the medical bay for 3 days because he thought it would go away on its own. Del had things to do. That was fine. He had always had things to do. That was what he was there for. The Galactic Council's official record of the incident at Outpost Heron 7 was filed as a minor diplomatic irregularity, resolved without formal action, no further proceedings expected. The Varek clan memory recorded it differently. It recorded the event in full, which was not something done often, and certainly not for the actions of a non-Varek. It recorded Sarah's account word for word, including the part at the end. It recorded the first Guardian designation. It recorded the name of the human who had been right there and had stayed. Somewhere in that record, in the old formal language the clan used for things it intended to remember for a long time, there was a word for what Delro was. The translation systems of the Galactic Council rendered it 3 different ways and could not agree on any of them. The closest any human linguist would later manage was this: one who did not leave. That was all. That was everything.